Elena Hart had learned, over the last 3 years, that a smile could be the strongest thing a person carried. It cost nothing to wear, yet it hid everything underneath. On the morning she walked into the grand office of the Blackthorn estate, she wore that smile like armor, and no one in the room could have guessed what it was protecting. The office smelled of old wood and fresh coffee. Sunlight came through tall windows and fell across a long table where a single folder waited, closed, patient, final. Around that table sat the people who had once decided her worth without ever asking her opinion. At the head of it stood Damien Blackthorn, the man everyone called the Alpha King, though to Elena, he had simply been the husband who never looked at her the way a husband should. 3 years earlier, their marriage had been arranged in a boardroom, not a chapel of love. Damien was the heir to one of the most powerful business empires in the country, a company called Blackthorn Holdings, built by his grandfather and expanded by his father into something that touched shipping lines, real estate, and half the skyline of the city. Elena's family, once respected, had fallen into debt after her father's failed investments. The marriage had been a rescue rope thrown to her family, and Elena, the eldest daughter, had been the one to grab it. She still remembered her wedding day. She remembered wearing white, while Damien barely looked at her, his eyes fixed somewhere past her shoulder, his jaw tight, his voice flat when he said his vows. She remembered the whispers among the guests, calling her a charity case, a poor girl who had married up. She remembered Damien's own words to her on their wedding night, spoken without cruelty, but without warmth either. "This marriage is a contract," he had said. "Nothing more. I will provide for you. I ask only that you do not embarrass this family." She had nodded then, because what else was there to do? She had been 23, frightened and desperate to save her parents from ruin. She told herself that respect could grow into something warmer, given enough time. She was wrong, but she did not know that yet. For the first year, Elena tried. She learned the names of every employee at Blackthorn Holdings, from the security guards to the executives. She organized charity events that brought the company good press. She sat quietly in board meetings, offering ideas that were often ignored, until someone else repeated them later and received the credit. She cooked dinner some nights, even though the house had 3 chefs, because she remembered her mother saying that food made a house feel less like a hotel. Damien rarely came home before midnight. When he did, he ate in his study, alone, the door closed. By the second year, Elena stopped trying to make him love her, and instead focused on surviving him. She noticed how his assistant, a woman named Vivian, always seemed to be near him at events, her hand resting a little too long on his arm, her laughter a little too loud at his jokes. Elena never confronted him. She had learned early that accusations only earned her a colder silence, and silence from Damien was worse than any argument. There was a particular evening, during the company's anniversary gala, that Elena would never forget. She had worn a soft blue dress, nothing flashy, because Damien preferred she not draw attention. She had stood beside him for photographs, smiling the practiced smile she had perfected. Later that night, she overheard him speaking with his mother near the garden terrace. "She is not what this family needed," his mother had said. "A pretty face and good manners, but no real strength. You should have married someone who understood our world." Damien had not defended her. He had simply said, "It was never my choice to begin with," and walked away. Elena had stood behind a marble pillar, listening, her heart cracking quietly where no one could hear it. She did not cry that night. She had promised herself long ago that she would not give this family the satisfaction of her tears. Instead, she went home, sat at her small writing desk by the window, and began to plan. It was during the 3rd year that everything changed, though no one around her noticed at first. Elena began taking business courses online, using a name that was not her own, so no one at Blackthorn Holdings would recognize her. She studied finance, negotiation, and corporate law late into the night, after Damien left for work, and before the house staff woke. She discovered she had a mind for numbers, a talent no one had ever bothered to notice because no one had ever asked. She also began quietly rebuilding her father's old company. It had been small, a modest textile business, but it still held a valid license and a loyal handful of former employees who remembered her father fondly. Using a small inheritance from her grandmother, money that had nothing to do with the Blackthorn name, Elena bought back the company's remaining shares one at a time, careful and patient, like someone assembling a puzzle no one else could see. She hired an old family friend, a retired accountant named Mr. Sengupta, to help her manage the books. She found new suppliers. She secured a modest but promising contract with a hotel chain that needed uniforms and linens. Slowly, without anyone at Blackthorn Holdings paying attention, her father's company began to breathe again. Elena told no one, not her parents, who still believed she was simply the quiet, obedient wife of a powerful man, not her sister, who called occasionally to ask if married life had gotten any easier, certainly not Damien, who barely asked her how her days were spent. It was Vivian, ironically, who gave Elena the final push she needed. One afternoon, Elena had come home earlier than expected and found Vivian in the study with Damien, the two of them standing close, papers spread across the desk between them, though the papers were the least interesting thing in the room. Damien stepped back quickly when he saw her, his expression unreadable, but Vivian only smiled, a small, satisfied curl of the lips that told Elena everything she needed to know. "I was just leaving," Vivian said, gathering her things with unhurried confidence, as though she owned the room, as though Elena were the visitor. Elena said nothing. She simply stepped aside to let Vivian pass, then turned and walked to her own room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. She did not cry. She had done enough of that privately in the early years. Instead, she felt something colder and clearer settle over her, like frost forming on glass. That night, she opened her laptop and began drafting a different kind of document, not a business plan this time, but a legal one. A request for marital dissolution, carefully worded, quietly filed with a lawyer she had found through Mr. Sengupta, a woman named Farah Doshi, who specialized in cases exactly like this one, and who understood the value of discretion. The process took another 8 months. Elena continued to play her part at Blackthorn events, smiling for photographs, nodding at dinners, saying nothing about what she now knew, or what she was building behind the scenes. Her father's company, now renamed Hart Textiles in honor of her grandmother, secured a second major contract, this time with a chain of boutique hotels along the coast. The company's small but growing reputation for quality and reliability began to spread through word of mouth in the industry, the best kind of advertising there was. Damien, meanwhile, remained unaware. He was consumed with a merger negotiation that had been dragging on for months, a deal that would expand Blackthorn Holdings into international shipping. He barely noticed that Elena had grown quieter, more composed, less inclined to wait up for him or ask where he had been. He mistook her silence for resignation. He did not realize it was the silence of someone who had already left in every way that mattered, and was only waiting for the paperwork to catch up. The final piece came together on a rainy Tuesday morning. Farah Doshi called to say the dissolution papers were ready, and that Damien's own legal team, notified through proper channels, had raised no objections. It seemed, Farah noted with some amusement, that Damien had assumed Elena would never actually go through with it, that she had neither the resources nor the will to leave a man as powerful as him. Elena scheduled the signing for the following week, during a time she knew the family's senior lawyers, along with Damien's parents, would be present. She wanted witnesses, not for revenge, but for closure. She wanted this chapter to end cleanly, without any question of what had truly happened, without any room for the Blackthorn family to later claim she had run away in shame. On the morning of the signing, Elena dressed simply, a cream-colored blouse and dark trousers, her hair pulled back neatly. She did not wear jewelry that belonged to the Blackthorn family. Everything she wore that day was hers, bought with her own money, chosen for herself alone. When she arrived at the estate's office, the room was already full. Damien's mother sat stiffly near the window, her expression cool as always. His father stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, watching with the detached curiosity of a man observing a business transaction rather than the end of his son's marriage. Damien stood at the head of the table, and for the first time in a long while, Elena noticed something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not indifference, something closer to uncertainty. Farah Doshi laid the folder on the table and opened it, revealing the papers within. Everything was in order. Everything had been reviewed. All that remained was Elena's signature beside the line where Damien had already signed weeks earlier. Confident, she suspected, that she would eventually change her mind and never actually complete the process. Elena picked up the pen. It felt lighter than she expected, considering everything it represented. "Elena," Damien said quietly, his voice catching slightly, though he quickly cleared his throat to cover it. "Are you certain about this?" She looked up at him, and for a moment, 3 years of silence rose in her chest. All the dinners eaten alone, all the events where she had smiled while he stood distant, all the nights she had waited for a knock on her door that never came, but she did not let any of it show on her face. Instead, she simply said, "I have never been more certain of anything." She signed her name, the pen moving in a smooth, unhurried line. Then she closed the folder gently and slid it back across the table toward Farah, who nodded once, a quiet confirmation that everything was now complete. Elena stood. She looked around the room one final time, at Damien's mother, whose expression had not changed, at his father, who offered the faintest nod, almost respectful, as though acknowledging an opponent who had played a difficult game well. Finally, she looked at Damien. "I hope Blackthorn Holdings does well in the merger," she said simply, and she meant it, without bitterness. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Her heels made a steady sound against the marble floor, unhurried, calm, the sound of someone who was not running from anything, only walking toward whatever came next. She did not look back. She had learned long ago that looking back only made the next step harder. The door closed behind her with a soft click. For a moment, the room remained silent. Damien's parents exchanged a glance, though neither spoke. Damien himself stood at the head of the table, staring at the closed door, his hand still resting on the back of his chair. Then, without warning, his knees weakened. He caught the edge of the table, his breath suddenly uneven, as though something inside his chest had finally cracked open after being sealed shut for years. He had told himself, for 3 long years, that this marriage meant nothing to him, that Elena was simply an obligation tied to old family expectations. He had believed his own words so thoroughly that he had never questioned them, not once, not even when he noticed how the house felt too quiet on the nights she stayed in her room instead of waiting up for him. Now, standing in the office where she had just signed her name for the final time, he understood, all at once and far too late, that he had mistaken her patience for weakness, her quiet dignity for submission, her steady kindness for something he could take for granted indefinitely. He had never truly seen her, not once in 3 years, and now she was gone, and there would be no more chances to look properly. His mother said something about the merger schedule, her voice distant, unimportant. Damien did not answer. He sat down slowly in his chair, his hands trembling slightly, and for the first time since he was a boy, he allowed himself, in the privacy of that closing door, to feel the full weight of everything he had lost through his own blindness. Outside, in the courtyard, Elena walked toward the car that Mr. Sengupta had arranged for her, sunlight breaking through the clouds after the morning rain. She did not feel triumphant, exactly, nor did she feel sad. She felt, more than anything, free, the way a person feels after setting down a heavy bag they had carried so long they had forgotten how light their shoulders could feel without it. 6 months later, Hart Textiles secured a partnership with an international retailer, a deal large enough to place the company firmly back among the respected names in the industry, a quiet but complete restoration of everything her father had once built and lost. Elena stood at the center of it now, not as anyone's wife, not as anyone's obligation, but simply as herself, the woman who had learned, through 3 difficult years, that dignity did not require an audience, and that sometimes the strongest exit a person could make was the one taken quietly, with a steady hand and an unshaken smile. Damien Blackthorn never remarried. Colleagues said he still kept a photograph of their wedding day in his desk drawer, though no one ever asked him why, and he never offered an explanation. Some things, he had learned, were understood only in hindsight, and by then, understanding was the only thing left to hold.